Hello and welcome to Economic Times BFSI.com. My name is Amol Dethe and you're watching a special show of FinTech Diary. I have with me Sopnendu Mohanty, who's known as a global innovator, specifically into the FinTech space. Sopnendu, glad to have you.
Great pleasure to see you.
Sopnendu, I would like to learn from you that FinTechs have changed the actually financial world, in last couple of years. They have been innovating many products, but how is the regulator viewing it? Do you think, being a regulator, do you see that the FinTechs are matured or they're still in nascent stage?
I would consider we are in that stage where the maturity of fintechs are what I call regulatable. So they are something regulators will be comfortable with. Of course, you can see a lot of news where regulators have come down and there's a bit of a natural cleaning process.
Right.
But largely, if you speak to the founders, they're now getting it. That this is a regulated space. You got to stay focused on regulatory expectation. There are certain non-negotiable where earlier they were not that focused. For example, I'll give you an example. Everybody got know your customer.
Yes.
They got it. They were up there. Everybody knew that money laundering, terrorism financing is required. They got it.
Yes.
Where the issue was consumer protection,
Yes.
consumer transparency.
Yes.
No, that's where the gray area was. And
Yes.
that I think regulators have made clear signal.
Yes.
If you don't do this, this is also non-negotiable, and they got it right now.
Exactly.
If you look at the maturity of fintech companies, the 1, 2, 3 regulation is what they're expected to follow.
Yes.
So they're mature to deal with that. The next two stages, what I would say is the next phase,
Right.
which is market integrity,
Yes.
collective manipulation of systems and all
Yes,
these things.
yes.
So that I think has not been tested. That will the next regulatory maturity will hit in. And then comes financial stability, disproportionate risk you can create. And there's the last one on the tech risk side. I think regulators and the fintech companies have somehow figured out to work together. And there is almost a balanced way for fintech company to step up
Right.
to the regulatory expectation of tech risk management. But that's still driven not to the tech companies,
Right.
but on the client of that, whether it's a
Right.
bank, and they
Right.
get regulated under that framework,
Right.
and they're pushing that maturity on the fintech companies.
Right. Interestingly, what has happened is fintech stocks or startups generally
Yes.
talk more about the valuation than the innovation has become a trend.
Yes,
That is
yes,
one.
yes.
They should talk more about the product solving part, but they
Yeah.
talk more about the funding.
Right.
So,
Yes, yes.
how do you regulators view it? Do you think that they're more into making value business than the building a customer value, or how do you see
It's
that?
an interesting question because there's no good answer to that.
Yes.
Now, why? Let's understand why valuation is also critical. Because when a founder or an entrepreneur is thinking about a product, there's always a timing issue when the client comes and pays the bill
Right.
and where the product is heading to. Now, professional people who look at the valuation, assuming there's no misuse of that process,
Right.
it's okay to be valued more than what you perceive as
Right.
the value of the company,
Right.
right?
Right.
There's a time lag.
Right.
By then, everything becomes normalized. That also create a lot of capital to take
Yes.
risk on new product. It's a risk capital.
Yes.
So by design, it is not bad. But if the sole purpose of the founder is to create a valuation and exit, then there's a problem.
Yes.
The problem is not in the system. To me, the problem is misallocation of capital, which could have gone to somebody else who really deserved a better capital allocation.
Absolutely.
There's a more moralistic principle for me that
Yes.
capital allocation to the right area in the most optimal way is what all should aspire to. Now, if you can create a disproportionate story
Yes.
and money get allocated there, then there's something moral construct which
Yes.
get questioned there.
Yes.
From that perspective, I would say, yes, it is a concern when there's a valuation which is unrealistic.
Right.
But some point in time, the founders will have to reconcile to the real value.
Yes.
It may happen at the expense of something else, but that reality will never go away. But now what is happening because of the market correction, there is some amount of rationalization on the valuation.
Right.
There's some clear look at the financial models of this fintechs
Right.
and also regulatory maturity.
Right.
They're looking at whether this company will stand up to regulatory scrutiny
Right.
at a scale.
Right.
So there is a market normalization happening,
Right.
which I think directionally is the right thing.
So, I will. My question is about market normalization. Obviously, I will also
Yes,
ask you specifically about India
Yes.
in a minute. But when I spoke to you 4 to 5 years
Yes.
back, you said big techs will be a real a game changer for regulators because it's not easy for regulators to tame them or maybe regulate them. Cyber will be the biggest risks.
Yes.
So has regulators now also matured enough today to maybe look at
They
big
are.
tech with a great lens?
I think the regulatory capacity to regulate technology has increased.
Okay.
But I would say I would stretch that by saying that things like the Global FinTech Festival allows regulator to understand technology better through dialogues, what they meet. So there are multiple dimensions being added to the regulatory capacity to look at technology. The number of public discourse, number of public information now on any tech is so high that you actually can figure out what to deal with this risk around technology. Right. So that's one thing. Regulators are far more proactive in intervening in the tech space. Right. Whether it is responsible AI or in digital asset, they are actually making almost aggressive, I would say, progressive and aggressive stance on where they want this to go. Right. So there is that maturity. It's not the risk which we discussed 4 years back. Yes, has kind of minimized a lot, primarily because of the capacity and capability. Now, look at how many FinTech office has been now created around the world. Any credible or a big country, there is a FinTech office, there's a FinTech officer, and they're pushing through that whole need for right skills to do that. And then also market is also responding with the right support. Right.
So Indian fintechs are growing so significantly. I mean, we have thousands of them, but almost 24 fintechs are unicorn fintechs.
Yes.
There are a lot of fintech companies even doing a AUM or a loan disbursal of more than 50,000 crores.
Yes.
And thousands of crores of digital payments every day. Yes. How do you see from Singapore? What is the scope that you see for Indian fintechs?
If you, my way to look at it compared to China. China is by some estimate, somebody was telling me some $6-7 trillion of GMV is going there. Now, India's GMV could be less than $1 trillion. Now that's the growth. So even if you take all the thing happening in India today, just use China as a benchmark, you can see the path with a similar population and of course different economic construct, but that's the growth path. Right. So if you're sitting outside, you're looking at a fintech in India, you will look at where it can go, and that pathway is huge. Right. On that basis only, I will say India's opportunity on fintech is still a long way. There could be sectorial, but I'll say margins are getting squeezed. Payment being a good example. There could be an oversupply in certain sub-segment, but that's a natural market conditions which happens when this thing develops. But broadly speaking, I think this is a long runway. It's hardly the growth potential has been achieved.
Yeah. So India is also talking about global south now. Yes. So you see a great scope for Indian fintechs in Southeast Asian countries?
Because India, by design, has provided the environment for the fintechs to have the right muscle memory. Let me repeat, right muscle memory, which will be very handy when they go to global south. It's almost like they're getting trained in the right place, in the right environment to deal with that. So I can't see anybody better than Indian fintechs to deal with global south challenges.
Going ahead, maybe if you take a 3 to 5 years view, this is my last question. How do you see, the regulators also getting matured, or the fintechs? Will they expect fintechs to become regulated entities, or will they treat them as they are? How do you see the whole regulators view will be on the
general
fintechs?
Condition is regulators assume that today, if you are a serious fintech player, you are expected to be kosher when it comes to regulation. There's no question. Tech is part of our life. There's an inherent risk if you don't regulate it properly. Right. And whether it is a financial regulator or it is a non-financial regulator, tech, business processes, consumer protection, you add all this thing, you are expected to find regulatory framework to deal with. So that's you can't avoid. So I think today we're in a far better situation than what we used to be a few years back. And I'm happy that my own personal journey after 10 years in this space, if I have to find a way to close this long process, I say that we have come to a stage where we're all ready for the next growth.
Certainly. We had seen one great partnerships with Singapore and India over the UPI. Do you see that such partnerships will blossom in future?
It will get bigger and more pronounced and more expansive. And I would say it is a legitimate, genuine, and there is a need to do more of that. And India-Singapore has been deeply connected in many layers, and I'm quite optimistic. And I'm quite optimistic more so now. And especially this is the first time I commented on some of the social media. What I saw in GFF gives me a huge confidence. India is going to do better now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sopnendu, for all these insights.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for watching Economic Times, BFSI.com or ETBFSI.com. Thank you.